Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer, and today we'll talk about Pennsylvania's role not only in tomorrow's general election, but also looking ahead to 2024. If you'd like to join the discussion, you can call us toll-free at 1-877-PA6-5001 or text us at 717-219-4001. We'll also take questions from PCN's Facebook page submitted earlier. But first, we're joined today by Stephen Caruso, Capitol reporter for Spotlight PA. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Francine.
You've written, as Pennsylvanians are going to the polls, you've written quite a bit about the Pennsylvania race for a seat on the state Supreme Court, particularly that there are two entities that are the biggest funders for this race. Who are they?
Yeah, so what we've seen, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, 7-member court, super important. They rule on everything from abortion to election law to COVID lockdown. So there's an open seat after the death of Justice Max Baer last year, and we've seen a tremendous amount of money flow in, but just that one seat on the line. I think our most recent keeping track, it's about like 12.5 million, and that number is definitely going to go up. And the two entities that are really spending big are in favor of Republicans. There's Commonwealth Leaders Fund. This is a PAC that's been active in Pennsylvania, particularly these court elections since about 2019. Its main funder is Jeff Yass, who's a billionaire stock trader from Montgomery County, who's really become more and more influential in Republican politics and his ability to move money around. Though I should say he also does donate to some Democrats. One of his biggest issues is school choice, but overall he just supports usually a very conservative sort of pro-business agenda. Then on the Democratic side, we have this group, Pennsylvania for Judicial Fairness. It just was registered this year, and it has gotten like two groups that often spend for Democratic judicial candidates are unions, particularly trade unions, and trial lawyers. The trial bar of Philadelphia has an enormous amount of money at its disposal, and they've poured money not just to the candidates themselves, but also to Pennsylvania Judicial Fairness. It's also set up in a way it's gotten dark money donations from groups that I'm still getting my hands around, and they have got it. They raised at least $5 million according to their most recent campaign finance report, and they've just been spending that like crazy. So that Spotlight story, we said, I think, like I said, 12.5 million. There's no way that number hasn't gone up in just the past couple days.
As you just voiced, recent reports by Spotlight PA noted that judicial campaigns are mostly funded by unions, lawyers, and special interest groups. Does that pose a conflict of interest?
Well, it's interesting. Like, if you talk to the candidates, they're going to say no. And there are very special rules for how judges campaign. A judge actually cannot ask for a donation themselves. They have a whole fundraising committee that's supposed to do all of it. If a judicial candidate said, hey, will you give me money? They'd be breaching that. And it kind of gets at that fundamental question of, Pennsylvania is one of only a handful of states that elects judges. And then even further, handful that elects them in partisan elections. There is an R and a D next to people's name when they run for this seat. Republican Carolyn Carluccio, Democrat Daniel McCaffrey, and that's unusual. It was actually funny. I caught up with a few other reporters with Judge Carluccio last week, and she was even saying, look, we're both beat up here, and this is definitely making me think like maybe we need to think about a system, because having someone come on the bench who's been subject to millions of dollars in attack ads might not be good for the judiciary. But she fell short of saying exactly what she thought should replace it. I'm going to work in the system, but she did note that this has been a battering, bruising election. And, just speaking of the money, I threw out that 12.5 million. For context, in 2015, when the court flipped to Democrats, that race was about 16 million. For 3 seats up, 3 seats were open, $15 million. Now 1 seat, 12 million minimum. I've seen some reports that put it at 17 million. I'm waiting to get to the very end. Like, I would not be shocked if we maybe even hit $20 million for a single seat. And that is an insanely large amount of money.
As you know, a lot of campaign funding is going directly into ads. How are the campaigns being portrayed?
Yeah, what we've seen is that Carluccio's been mostly attacked by ads that say that she will oppose abortion rights, or that she's wishy-washy on abortion rights. There's been a lot of focus on that for Democrats when they're campaigning for these judgeships. There is a case that could have come before the state Supreme Court that will kind of decide this question of if state law defends the state constitution, protects access to abortion, and if public funds can go to abortion. For McCaffrey, a lot of the ads have focused on attacking him as a just a member of the machine of Philadelphia politics and trying to tie him to his older brother Seamus, who resigned from the court during the Porngate scandal. Basically, this was just judges were sharing information lewd jokes, scantily clad women on government servers. He received some of those emails, and so it's in that way, obviously, it's been a lot of attacks that I think are getting under people's skins.
How much influence will these political ads have on who gets elected as opposed to things like candidate appearances or PA Bar Association ratings?
A lot of really smart political scientists have looked at this, and I haven't talked to anyone super recently, but what I've read and what I've seen and what I've heard is basically that you sometimes can have a boomerang effect if you go negative too hard. Voters are turned off by that. I do think there's a lot to be said about getting name out there. I mean, how many people actually come out to vote in these elections in odd numbered years? Not that many, usually 20, 30% turnout, which isn't that good. Like when you can get 50, 70% turnout in general elections and even years with federal candidates up. So, it's really hard to say. It definitely raises awareness, though. I'm sure way more people have heard the names of our Supreme Court candidates this year than in any year where they only spent maybe $5 million on ads. I mean, I feel like I can't open up a streaming service or watch TV without seeing an ad telling me about how good or bad McCaffrey or Carluccio is.
As you noted, the turnout tends to be generally low for judicial appellate races. Talk a little bit about some of the issues that come before the bench and why people should still consider voting for these.
Oh, yeah. I mean, any issue you think of has come before the state Supreme Court, for your viewers. I mean, gun laws, abortion law, education issues, election law, mail-in voting. I mean, just the outcome of the election was litigated in front of the state Supreme Court. Spotlight PA has a great resource that we put on our website where we tried to run down a lot of these issues of and even gets into matters of high-profile criminal cases. Bill Cosby's case, Meek Mill's case, all of these might come before the state Supreme Court. This is a very powerful position. Courts have only become more influential in our government as the legislature and the executive kind of gridlock. I mean, just last week, I believe it was last week, we saw a ruling from the state Supreme Court on, or a Commonwealth Court, another appeals court on Pennsylvania having a carbon tax, more or less, fees to try and control carbon emissions. So all of these issues go before our justices, and I feel like we don't think about them a lot. So I would just say if for some reason you're watching, you don't plan on voting, you probably should vote.
Stephen Caruso, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to take a brief break, and we'll be back with more of the PCN Capitol Preview.
For 25 years, PCN and the PIAA have partnered to bring you the state high school football championships. 25 years, and the best teams and players from across the state have participated in the PIAA football championships. You can catch a future star on PCN. Join PCN starting on December 7th for 3 days, totaling 6 live games on PCN Select and on cable. PCN is Pennsylvania sports.
It's that time of year again when footballs and pumpkin spice fill the air, and Thanksgiving is right around the corner. Give your friends and family the feast of Pennsylvania with a donation to PCN. You'll be supporting programming bringing you the best in Pennsylvania sports, history and culture, and politics and policy. Go to PCNTV.com to support PCN.
Welcome back. Our guests today are TJ Rooney. He previously served as a state representative from 1993 to 2005 and also chaired the Democratic State Committee. Also with us is Alan Novak. Alan served as a councilman, committeeman, and county Republican Party chair and chaired the Republican State Committee. Both are founding members of the Rooney, Novak, Isenhour Group. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today. Alan, we'll start with you.
Sure.
Tomorrow, Pennsylvanians will vote for statewide judicial, appellate seats, as well as some local races. Why is tomorrow important?
Pardon?
Why is tomorrow important?
Courts have a big impact on an agenda legislatively. So courts are always going to be important. And then at the local level, I've always said and believed that, frankly, that government closest to the people has the bigger impact on people. We focus a lot on federal, we focus a lot on state, but townships and counties have a lot of impact on the land use in their counties. So I've always thought that the local government, whether it's towns, cities, boroughs, has a bigger impact on voters than, frankly, the more attention it's paid to federal and state elections. So I think local races are very important.
TJ, your thoughts?
Yeah, there's no question about the importance of local elections. And Alan, referenced the big impact that the courts have on our lives of everyday Pennsylvanians. And, the thing that sort of troubles me is the outsized impact that the courts now play in elections in not only Pennsylvania, but in America. When you see the kind of money being spent on judicial races, I think back to the time when Alan and I chaired the parties, you had to stand on your head and perform gymnastics to get people to care about a statewide judicial race. Now, because of the role that courts play in our electoral politics, it's very much different. So it's I don't know if it's encouraging or if it's somewhat debilitating, but it is what it is. And tomorrow will be the opportunity for us to not only elect a new Supreme Court justice and Superior Court justices as well, but as Alan said, from every courthouse and every bailiwick across the Commonwealth, we will send new people to office, and we hope springs eternal. We hope they'll do good things.
A reminder to our viewers that if you'd like to join in the discussion, you can call us toll-free 1-877-PA6-5001 or text us 717-219-4001. TJ, I'm going to come back to you. What will you look at within tomorrow's results to get some kind of indication of what 2024 might look like? Yeah,
it's a great question, Francine, and it is sort of the threshold question. Who comes out to vote determines who wins. And my feeling is that Democrats, this is a tough election for us. It's an odd numbered year, and we are the party in power in terms of the presidency. So it makes it a difficult year. If people come out, if women come out en masse to vote because of the Hobbs decision, for example, in the Supreme Court race, that will have a positive impact on Democrats across the state. If these elections really do turn on almost exclusively local issues, then I think that can pose a bit of a challenge for us. Again, history tells us that the party in power has a tough sled in these off-year elections. Do we motivate our voters sufficiently to come out? We typically enjoy the opportunity to do that better in even-numbered years. So you hit the nail on the head, Francine. It depends not only who comes out, but for what reasons will dictate. If they come out for national reasons, advantage Democrats. If they come out for purely local reasons and express some dissatisfaction with what's going on in their backyard, we might have a little bit of a problem.
Alan, what do you think? Is Dobbs still a big factor, or are there other issues that you think will drive voters to the polls?
Well, I think that Dobbs is still a factor. If you watch Philadelphia media, as I did yesterday for the Eagles game, I saw a lot of New Jersey commercials because they have their assembly races. And you would have thought it's all about Dobbs and abortion when you looked at those commercials. A little closer to, on the Pennsylvania side of this, I think it's a turnout to vote motivator. Particularly, I think Democrats do it very well. And I think that where the local races are going to turn on local issues, what's going to get voters to put those votes in the bank. And, my pet peeve right now is how the Democrats are so good at at banking their mail-in votes, getting them in early, understanding it's election season, not election day. So when you look at numbers, I think Dobbs and just the local enthusiasm will be a factor in the suburban parts of Pennsylvania. obviously then the wild card are school board races.
I want to jump on something that you just referenced. Both state and national Republicans have been calling on Republicans to bank their vote through mail-in ballots. A few years earlier, Donald Trump had said that mail-in ballots were a scam. So why the change of heart?
Well, I think the change of heart is you see what's been happening in elections, and it is election season, and I happen to vote by mail. So, I get my ballot quickly, I vote quickly, I get done with it. I think when I look at numbers, and this was last week, so they may not be accurate now, but I think statewide there have been about 447,000 Democrat mail-in votes received and only 124,000 Republican mail-in votes. That's a lot to make up on Election Day, and that's still numbers coming in. I also think, and when I looked at my home county, in Chester County, there were more Democrat requests than Republican requests for mail-in votes by a factor of 3 times. And the rate of return is much higher for Democrats who request the mail-in votes than the rate of return for Republicans. So right now, if you look at Chester County, it's about 20,000 in the door already that are Democrat and about 5,000 in the door for Republicans. I just think that that's the ground game today. It used to be when TJ and I did our political thing, it was, Election Day, turnout. But turnout now is the turnout during election season. And I think the Republicans really have to understand that's the blocking and tackling of elections these days.
TJ, do you think that mail-in ballots encourage more turnout?
I'm hoping that the Republicans continue to stick their fingers in their ears and not listen to anything that Alan just said, because he's exactly right. And to put another point on it, the fact that we're banking votes runs antithetical to what we've also seen in this election cycle, which is a pretty substantial increase in Republican voter registration across the state. So I think it affirms the old story that the easy part is getting folks registered. The hard part is getting them to vote. If you believe that, as I do, then if you take the advice of the former president and tell people that you'll set yourself on fire if you vote by mail, no wonder we're continuing to do well electorally. At the same time, we're losing ground when, we often say, because we're old now, that when he and I did that, when Alan and I were doing this stuff, when I left, we had about 1 million vote advantage over Republicans in terms of registration in Pennsylvania. That was 2010. That was 13 years ago. We had about 1 million vote registration advantage. Today, it's less than 500,000. But at the same time, we're doing quite well in politics. And if you don't think there's a straight line between voting by mail and our electoral success, I'm here to tell you you're mistaken.
We have a viewer question via text. Why does Pennsylvania wait until Election Day to count all the absentee ballots? Who does it benefit?
Good question. It's an amazingly good question, and it's wrong. It should change. There have been, and I think it will, because as the Republicans move toward embracing vote by mail, it becomes just a matter of getting it done. You can't, if you allowed even to begin counting earlier in the day, it would have an effect. So the idea that somehow a fraud would occur or the results would be leaked, again, is not the same story that's told in other states that count their ballots early and give people. It would totally remove, as I think the questioner might be getting to, this notion where Republicans, we count the day of vote early, and that shows, and it often shows a disproportionate lead for Republicans. And then we add on the mail-in ballots, and that turns the tide. For a lot of reasons, I think that needs to change.
I'd like to read some data. I know TJ just referenced voter registration. According to the Department of State, as of October 23rd of this year, there are 3.89 million registered Democrats, that's 45%, to 3.45 million registered Republicans, 39.9%. The remainder are either independent or registered to another party. Is party registration an important indication of what you expect to see at the results?
I wouldn't say it's as important an indication of results as, to me, I think what party registration is tied to some of those polls you see about the direction of the country, And the fact that the party in power in the White House generally has a and as we see now, has a slippage when it comes to right track, wrong track, or of the direction of the country, or voter dissatisfaction. I think because of those changes in registration, it behooves everybody to work a little bit harder to take advantage of those. Democrats have to work harder to offset that. Republicans ought to be working harder to get those newly registered votes in the door. It used to be an adage when TJ and I did this, that if you had somebody change their registration, you could pretty much count on them voting in this election cycle. I don't know if I apply that to this, this odd year election, local election, and statewide judges. I think it really applies more when it comes to the presidential year and the even year elections, when we have federal elections and statewide legislative races.
If I could just put 2 points on that, Francine, it'll be fascinating to me to see, as the governor's executive order, which now allows people to be registered to vote when they renew their automobile or when they get a driver's license. That's had, from what I understood from the initial reporting, a pretty profound impact on Republican registration. Number one. Number two, and I think my dear friend would agree with me on this. When you talk about registration, the one thing that you can't escape is the number of men and women registering as independents in Pennsylvania. And the fact that they're shut out of primary elections is abhorrent and also needs to change. And I view, as a Democrat, we ought to, as Democrats, we ought to be out in front advocating for allowing independents to vote in primaries. Because again, at the end of the day, if we're for independents and their participation, I think we'll be rewarded for that at the ballot box. The old stiff arm, no independence is a mindset that needs to change, just as those who believe that mail-in voting will set your soul on fire. That needs to change, and hopefully these things will over.
And I agree very strongly with TJ on that. We both support allowing independents to vote in primary elections. I've seen, I guess that number is anywhere from 18 to 20% now, registered independent voters. They make the difference in any swing race when it comes to general election. And often the parties lock themselves into candidates that have a harder time appealing to that independent voter, and that independent voter is going to make the decision a few months later when it gets to the general election.
Representatives Jared Solomon and Chris Rabb are currently sponsoring legislation that would open primaries to individuals not registered with either of the major parties. Would that benefit either Republicans or Democrats in any way?
Well, I think it comes...
Well, also Dan Laughlin and Senator Collette as well. They've also been champions. Senator Boscola has been another champion on this. And there's others. I don't mean to leave anybody out, but they were early and out front. And certainly that's appreciated.
And to your question about the benefit, I think the benefit will accrue to whichever party or candidates make a concerted effort then to talk to independents. Independents, as we all see in primary elections now, no one's talking to an independent until maybe September. By then it might be too late when you consider positions primary candidates had to take to win their party primaries. So I think it will benefit the system. It'll benefit our society better. But at the end of the day, to which party will accrue the benefit, I think it comes down to which party recognizes the need to turn the primary election into a general election.
I'd like to shift our focus a little bit and talk about next year's presidential race. TJ, why has Pennsylvania been highlighted as one of the more important states in the presidential race over the last few cycles?
Well, if you look at the New York Times polling as of yesterday, you'll certainly see why. It shows the Times Siena College polling released yesterday shows that in the battleground states, President Biden is trailing former President Trump, in some cases by some pretty substantial margins. I would not, Francine, would absolutely not read in what will occur tomorrow and try to extrapolate much of how that will translate to 2024. Next year's election, it would appear at this moment in time to be another contest between President Biden and former President Trump. And while President Trump shows is posting some pretty strong numbers. I wouldn't read exactly too much into that yet. This election, this time of the season is still all about Joe Biden to a large degree. Once it becomes a two-person race, or three if what's his name Kennedy's in it, then it changes the dynamic on its head. It becomes a referendum, not just about Joe Biden, but also about Donald Trump and all the stuff we've been through with him. So I don't think tomorrow is. I mean, there's always important things and maybe trends to pick up on in terms of banking votes and in terms of how the newly registered break and things like that. But I wouldn't read writ large any strong signal or tell into what happens tomorrow and transfer that a year from now.
Would you like to weigh in as well?
Well, I agree with that. I think tomorrow's race, or the outcome tomorrow, is about the candidates on the ballot, about the messaging and the issues that matter locally, and the attention and intensity of the state court, particularly state Supreme Court race. People will read more into it. I look at some states around the country, and there are some states that, depending on the outcome, will be called bellwether or predictors for, 2024. Perhaps Virginia, Mississippi, Kentucky, perhaps there is something to be read into that. As TJ
even
said.
Jersey.
Yeah,
even the
Jersey.
legislative stuff Jersey's crazy right now.
So, but I think in Pennsylvania, although I remember 2017 was the shocker for us in Chester County, because we'd never lost a row office in 100 years. And it was the first year after the 2016 presidential election. And literally, for the first time in their history, the Democrats in Chester County won every courthouse race. And it has been sustained. It hasn't stopped since. If there's a slippage in numbers, perhaps some of it is the popularity of the president. But when I look at the ground game right now, I still think the local incumbent party in Chester County, the Democratic Party, is still turning out the mail-in votes, which has always been an indicator in the last three cycles as to how they're going to do.
I'd like to give our guests a brief break and tell you about some upcoming programming here on PCN. PCN's live general election coverage will air tomorrow night. We'll provide live poll results and speak with guests from the Pennsylvania Bar Association, Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts, and Muhlenberg College Institute of Public Opinion. Join us live at 9 p.m. Catch PCN's Voices of Veterans Marathon starting this Friday, November 10th until Sunday, November 12th. 2 new episodes will be featured each day this weekend, starting Friday at 9:30 a.m. Join us for On the Issues this week as we discuss the 2023 election and political burnout. First, we're joined by Fletcher McClellan, political science professor at Elizabethtown College, followed by Allison Dagnes, a political science professor at Shippensburg University. That's Wednesday night, beginning at 6. All the great public affairs event coverage and interviews you watch at PCN are now available for free online at PCNTV.com and on PCN Select. Thank you for watching PCN. PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN to continue to bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. As we get back into our discussion, I'll invite our viewers one more time. If you'd like to join our discussion, you can call 1-877-PA65001 or text us at 717-219-4001. TJ, before the break, you had noted some poll data. I just want to look at a couple different poll results in the Franklin and Marshall College poll that was released October 26th. 51% of those polled rated Joe Biden's performance as poor, yet in the same poll, a theoretical match between him and Donald Trump, Joe Biden came ahead 44 to Donald Trump's 42%. And then in a separate poll that you just referenced, non-related, this was conducted by New York Times, Trump leads Biden 48 to 44 in Pennsylvania. So what do you draw from all of that data?
What I draw from it is, we're going to have a challenge next year, but nobody alive didn't realize that. And I do think, Francine, it is, there's no question, this poll has hit the street today. There are wet mattresses across the landscape, especially so in Washington, D.C. I would encourage people to dry up. This race will be about you can't even frame it yet. Yes, it's likely to be between Donald Trump and Joe Biden and maybe and Kennedy. But it's going to be there's so much ground to cover in between. I mean, he's on trial. As I look up at the monitor, he's on the stand in one trial. He's got 3 more. I mean, he may not be a free man come election day 2024. So, yes, it's a challenge. Yes, people are uncomfortable with the economy. Yes, people think the president is too old. These are all issues that have to be faced, dealt with, and directly responded to. And I believe they can be overcome. And I believe when the choice comes down in a year from now, assuming it does, to a referendum between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, that Joe Biden will prevail in Pennsylvania on that question. But I understand I would not, for all the money, well, not all the money, but for lots of money, I would not want to be in the White House today because they are hearing from every bedwetting Democrat in America and every bedwetting donor across the board, and they ought to just dry up for a bit.
Alan, how has Donald Trump affected the Republican Party?
Well, to the plus side, he brought people out that we had a hard time previously getting to vote. On the negative side, there's a real split in the party between, I would say, establishment Republicans prior to Donald Trump and, the party base, which continues to overwhelmingly support him. If you look at the national numbers, as TJ said, I think we sitting here today know that's likely to be the president against the former president next year. I think that so I think his impact has been to bring a populist, very, very strong populist tone to the party. There are a lot of people I encounter that say I like his policies. I'm not sure I like him. But for 2 elections, at least, people who felt that way voted for him. We'll have to see next year because you've got a very unpopular sitting president and a very unpopular former president likely to be the matchup next year. I don't know in our history we've had anything like this where pretty clearly, as TJ said, you got a challenging economy, and the people most challenged are middle class and lower income earners. And you've got a president that people think is probably too old for the job. On the other hand, you've got one of the most visceral politicians we've seen in my lifetime as the alternative. It's tough for party building. Internally within the Republican Party, I can tell you, people look over their shoulder all the time to anticipate what's coming next with the next primary election for sitting Republican office holders. And we've seen that play out last year when you had some longtime stalwart Republican, very good legislators like Stan Saylor and Pat Brown lose primary elections. That's part of the factor.
With Mike Pence ending his campaign a few weeks ago, I believe at last count there are 8 candidates running for the Republican nomination. If Donald Trump is unpopular, why is he still leading the field?
He's popular among the Republican base. When you consider that his numbers are pretty much lapping the combination of Governor DeSantis and Ambassador Haley, you put the 2 of their numbers together, and the former president's numbers are twice their numbers combined. So he's unquestionably, for those grassroots voters, he's the guy.
And it's exactly, I think, Francine, why, again, I don't want to be a one-trick pony, but why the people are saying no to the Democrat, no to the Republican, and looking for something in between. And that's why you see registration exploding among independent and non-affiliated voters. So it only makes good sense when you talk, as we talked about, for general elections, to speak to these, to include these voters, to speak to these voters. They're going to be determinative of who wins and who loses. it's an odd time. How many people have we encountered that say, in a nation full of all these people, how come these are our two choices? Well, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but it is what it is. And the people who will decide, assuming these are our two choices, are the ones in the middle. So why are we not taking advantage of the opportunity to speak to the folks in the middle?
TJ, you mentioned earlier about Robert Kennedy's announcement he's going to run as an independent in the presidential race. If he stays in to the end, what impact do you think that'll have?
It might. I don't think it's going to disadvantage us. And I can't imagine it helps them. I mean, he's just an odd duck. It's the old saying. I think it was said about his father when he ran for the Senate in New York. If your name was Robert Francis, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If this guy's name wasn't Robert Kennedy Jr., he'd have a net thrown around him. So I'm not entirely sure. I mean, for people who like nets thrown around him, I guess he's got some grab. But for most other people, they just think he's a kook.
Let's shift gears a little bit. A little earlier, throughout the fall, the House and Senate have been unsuccessful in trying to settle on a date to move the primary election earlier next year. So that will not happen. But is there a benefit to having an earlier primary in presidential years?
For whom? A benefit for whom? For Pennsylvania? Mm-hmm. Perhaps. I think to be in the game earlier, for enthusiasm. At the end of the day, it's probably, there's a limit to what that is. That's all about, okay, we don't want to be at the back end where we don't matter. We want to be at the front end. I would always look at that in terms of what's the consequence to the party or the party candidates that aren't on the ballot for president in the primary. So I think sometimes it's been overrated, the need to be earlier. Because you see all these states now trying to jump, and now you see candidates like the president deciding, I'm going to ignore New Hampshire, I'm going to go to South Carolina because he did very, very well in his primary that set him up to be elected president. So I don't know. During my days at the Republican National Committee, there was always all of these debates about early primaries in Delaware and Iowa caucuses in New Hampshire. At the end of the day, I think it's the bigger states on Super Tuesday that decide it. So do we want to be in that mix? Probably. But I think the passion around it is a little greater than I frankly see or feel.
Yeah, it's sort of we are a swing state. And as long as we maintain our status as a swing state, it really doesn't matter, because I can understand why a state would want to get in early if they're ordained, if it's preordained, they're going to either be red or blue in the general election, because then you can get some face time. But the one thing, at least in my adult lifetime, that we've never lacked in Pennsylvania is face time with the principal candidates seeking the highest office in the land. So I'm sure there are other reasons that are particular to the legislators who have made the case for it. But as it relates to presidential politics, again, as long as we maintain, until we stop maintaining our status as a swing state, it's not a big deal for me.
I'd like to move on to the U.S. Senate race. Bob Casey's seat is up for re-election. Dave McCormick has already announced his candidacy, and the Republican State Committee has already endorsed him. Why do you think they've endorsed him this early?
To make it clear that he is the candidate and to forestall any kind of challenge and any kind of outcome like Republicans saw 2 years ago. I think the very interesting U.S. Senate race, which was much closer than the governor race, was impacted, I think, a lot by the fact that the governor race was not a contest. And so I think the state committee did this to make it really clear our best chance to win is Dave McCormick. Let's not mess around. Let's not have fringe candidates start pulling the party apart at the base. Let's all get around a candidate, and let's set this thing up for a very interesting general election.
Both of you have previously served as state committee chairs. TJ, I'll start with you. Does the state committee endorsement hold the same value now as it did when the two of you served?
No.
Why do you think
No.
that changed?
Well, because politics have changed. And I mean, I certainly don't mean to disrespect my former colleagues on the state party, but Citizens United, for example, changed the face of politics immeasurably. It cut into what parties do and what they're all about. When Alan and I were running the parties, the thing that was, and maybe today still is, most sacrosanct was the mail permit, the direct mail permit.
Yeah.
And that was Citizens United. Nobody cares about what the postal rate is because there's so much money, it makes it irrelevant. It makes it not a factor. And that was something that the parties had that was of extreme importance to candidates from the state house to from the courthouse to the White House. So the it's not about whether the parties themselves have done anything particularly right or wrong. It's just the way politics have changed. You know, you can run a campaign in Pennsylvania and win 6 states and win six counties and win a decisive victory. You know, so it changes. The dynamic, the field upon which politics is played has changed so much that it's led to the detriment of or the erosion of our parties, which is why exactly I think we ought to be talking independence.
I agree 100%. Politics has changed. The rules have changed. The rules around money have changed. And I don't think state party endorsements mean nearly as much as they did during the times that TJ and I did our things for our respective parties. We had strong governors. He served Governor Rendell as state party chair. I served Tom Ridge as state party chair. Those governors invested in the state party, made the state party decisions. And there were strong county organizations that flowed from a very coordinated, fairly unified state party. That's not the case now.
They viewed it as a referendum. He's right. He's exactly right. And they viewed it, Tom Ridge, Ed Rendell, as a referendum on them. If the state party did well, that means they were doing well. And that sort of changed, at least in our side, with Governor Wolf, who he didn't use the state party in his first or second election, for that matter. So again, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Alan, but you're exactly right.
One other question. Since the two of you served as state committee chairs, social media has really grown and expanded and changed. How has that changed the behavior of the candidates?
Well, I think the candidates I think they pitch their message to social media, or social media is a way of getting their message out. And social media is a lot cheaper than the traditional ways of getting a message out that TJ and I remember from our party chair days. I think social media has put some candidates in a position where, regardless of where a county party or state party may want to be with those elected committee people, this candidate has momentum built from social media messaging and campaigning that is a strong headwind. When you look at the last governor race, Doug Mastriano had a tremendous, very strong social media campaign. And there were so many Republicans in that field for governor. Social media was driving his campaign. All the others were doing it the traditional way. And he had a tailwind that none of them could ever catch up to.
Do you think that social media has made candidates more careful?
Yeah, well, initially it did. We all learned our lessons when it first came out, and we write expletive-laden messages to constituents. That went over, as you can appreciate, not so well. So it is. It's, we used to lament how politics has been dumbed down. Well, social media has just, expedited that exponentially. But it does exactly what Alan just suggested. It allows you to build a following that can lead you so far. I think the other part of the Mastriano story is exactly, I started watching him during the pandemic when he would have these fireside chats or whatever the hell they were, and there'd be like 30,000 people on. I watched that evolve, and I was wildly impressed. Where it falls off is you can't just be a one-trick pony. You need to be able to speak to people. You need to be able to interact, have human interactions with people. And that's where it falls down for some on their side and on ours. Yeah. It's one thing to spew off a spicy tweet that titillates, the people on your side, and it pisses off people on their side, and everyone else just thinks you're a dope. So like there is that part of it that, I think we're still learning about. It's one thing to be titillating. It's another thing to be just a complete dope.
The one thing about social media that I think we probably have to acknowledge, and former President Trump probably demonstrated this more than anybody I can ever recall. Social media is a way to get into, intrude in, and dominate a news cycle. It's intrusive. If you use social media skillfully or outrageously, at the end of the day, our candidates, and we used to struggle. How do we get earned media? How do we get the media to pay attention to our candidate or to us? Well, social media has solved all that for candidates, because a tweet will suddenly insert itself into a news cycle, and then you're off and running based on that social media intrusion.
We only have a couple of minutes left. What more can be done to make viewers feel secure that our elections are safe and secure and legitimate?
Well, know that they are. I think that for people who have concerns about the integrity, the safety of our elections, should go and witness how the process unfolds. I was just speaking this morning with a gentleman who is a libertarian, and he was just so eloquent in expressing how secure, in his view, the ballots are when they reach the courthouse door. Now, he raises some legitimate issues about what happens prior to arriving at the courthouse door. But once they're there, they're safe, secure, and they're counted properly. There's no advantage. And there's plenty of people who have eyes on it, independent eyes on it. So for anybody who is concerned about the integrity of our elections, I would just respectfully submit, go watch in your court, in your county, how it works. And I think you'll be disabused of that notion.
I agree. The more transparency, the better. The more people can see, the more people that can trace. I think transparency leads to feeling better, more secure about a process. So the more transparency, the better.
Alan Novak, TJ Rooney, gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today. PCN's Larry Kaspar talked to Representative Tim O'Neill about a resolution that would change the operating rules of the State House.
Why do you want to make a change to the House's operating rules?
Well, Larry, that's because just recently we saw a vote that occurred after 11 p.m. Now, the House operating rules actually expressly prohibit session beyond 11 p.m. without the House actually approving, the whole House approving us to go beyond 11 p.m. And unfortunately, what we saw was a maneuver where a committee meeting was called literally 10:58, 2 minutes till 11 p.m. And a committee meeting was called. A substantial amendment was offered in the Appropriations Committee. Our members had literally minutes to review an amendment that they then had to vote on at a few minutes before midnight. This practice ended years ago, actually decades ago, in the General Assembly, and it's expressed, as I mentioned before, it's expressly forbidden on the House floor. It should be expressly forbidden in committee as well.
As far as you're concerned, Representative, just what are the consequences for the public when lawmakers on committees vote on bills late in the day?
Well, certainly, whether we're talking about operations on the House floor or especially in committees that the later you go to the middle of the night, certainly the less people are aware that something's happening, the less people are observing it, even if they may want to. And it absolutely creates a transparency issue where things can happen in the middle of the night that might not happen in the normal light of day. That's what that practice back in 2005 was intended to stop. That's when the rule change happened back in 2005, 2006. That change was intended to stop this practice. And unfortunately, we saw it here in committee just a few weeks ago.
Now let's review. I realize this predates your being in office, Representative, but that is a significant date. In 2005, that did give rise to what people refer to now as the pay raise for legislators.
That's right. And for those that aren't aware, the pay raise was a middle of the night vote that significantly raised the salaries of elected officials across the board. You saw in just the next re-election cycle, you saw a significant turnover in the House of Representatives in particular, as the constituents throughout the state balked at the pay raise that this middle of the night pay raise that was voted, and subsequently you saw those new members come into office who had been elected on the back of the pay raise come in and change the role to ensure that this middle of the night vote in the secrecy of the halls of Harrisburg couldn't happen again. That's what the rule change that I'm proposing is attempting to stop altogether. We were actually under the impression that it had been stopped since back in 2006. Unfortunately, it turns out that the rules are actually enacted are vague when it comes to committee votes. And I intend on clarifying that to make sure that it not only can happen, it not only is prevented from happening on the House floor, but also in committee as well.
Take a minute and explore the significance and the importance of what committees have to do before a bill comes before the entire chamber.
Yeah, absolutely. Every piece of legislation is first referred to a committee. A committee is typically a more specialized, smaller group of legislators that focus on specific topics. So, for instance, there's the Appropriations Committee that focuses on budgetary matters. There's the Finance Committee that focuses on taxes, and the Committee on Veterans Affairs, which obviously focuses on veterans. Each one of those would have that subject, and a piece of legislation dealing with those particular subjects would be vetted first in committee before it comes out to the House floor to be voted on in the whole House. What we saw just a few weeks ago is a bill sent to the Appropriations Committee. Now, the Appropriations Committee is special. All legislation goes through the Appropriations Committee. But a substantial change was made, like I mentioned before, just minutes before midnight in the Appropriations Committee to substantially change. Our members had barely any time to review those changes to make an informed decision in committee of whether or not to support that change. That alone is an issue, let alone the fact that it was done at midnight. Both of those combined certainly create a scenario that it's really gamesmanship of the rules as opposed to above board legislating in a transparent and open process.
Representative, are your colleagues on board for the change you're proposing?
Absolutely. We've seen, certainly in the Republican caucus, we've seen widespread support for my proposal. Many members of the Appropriations Committee in particular have signed on to my co-sponsor memo to support my proposal. I'm encouraging the Democratic caucus to get on as well, because regardless of whether or not the Democrats or Republicans have control of the House, this is a practice that should not continue into the future.
And what is the word so far on Democrats as far as this issue goes?
Well, the Democrats were the ones that had control to pull this maneuver off. They, at least initially, have less of an issue with doing it because they were the ones that actually executed it. I do believe over time, more and more Democrats will realize that this practice is not a practice either of the caucuses really want to go down into the future. And I'm certainly hopeful that more and more Democrats will support it as we move forward.
Last question, Representative. Any idea when the entire legislature will, or rather your chamber, will consider this idea?
Well, it's still up in the air. As you know, Larry, we still sit here today with an unfinished budget. We still sit here today with a bunch of funding issues that still need to be completed all the way back from the end of June. So to be honest, a rule change to kind of clean up the system isn't at the very top priority, especially one that points out something that one of the caucus has done improperly. So I wouldn't expect it to be considered immediately, but I do hope as we have discussions with the Democratic caucus, we could come to an agreement to ensure that this doesn't happen in the future.
Representative Tim O'Neill, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
That concludes today's show. There's no PCN Capitol Preview tomorrow, but join us for live election night coverage. We'll provide live poll results and be joined by guests from the Pennsylvania Bar Association, Pennsylvanians for Modern Courts, and the Muhlenberg College Institute of Public Opinion. Live coverage begins tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.